The cowboy fought a masked Apache warrior and froze when the helmet fell. It was a woman. Fletcher Knox had tracked men across 3 territories, but he'd never seen anyone move like this. The figure ahead wore a bronze mask that caught the afternoon light, moving through the canyon with a predator's grace. When their eyes finally met across the narrow pass, something shifted in Fletcher's chest. Not fear, but recognition of an equal. He didn't know yet that in less than an hour, everything he believed about strength would shatter like glass. He didn't know the face behind that mask would haunt him for reasons he couldn't name. And he certainly didn't know that the warrior he was about to fight would become the only person who truly understood him. 3 days earlier, Fletcher had been sitting in a cramped office that smelled of tobacco and old leather when the town council made him an offer. A masked rider had been intercepting supply wagons heading toward the new settlements. No one had been hurt yet, but goods were vanishing. Food, medicine, tools. The attacks were strategic, planned, executed with military precision. They wanted Fletcher to track down this ghost and bring them back. Dead or alive, they said, though the way they said it suggested they preferred dead. Fletcher took the job because he needed the money, because tracking was what he did, because sitting still made his skin crawl. He didn't take it because he cared about the settlers or their supplies. He took it because movement was better than stillness, and the wilderness was the only place he felt like himself. The trail led him northwest into territory that had been Apache land before the treaties that weren't worth the paper they were written on. Fletcher knew these lands were being squeezed, that the people who'd lived here for generations were being pushed into smaller and smaller spaces. But that wasn't his problem. His problem was following hoof prints and broken branches, reading the story the earth told him. The rider was careful, skilled, covering their tracks in ways that showed training, but everyone made mistakes eventually. Everyone left traces. On the second day, Fletcher found a campsite in a rocky outcrop. The ashes were cold, but not ancient. Whoever this was, they were alone. No backup, no support, just one person against an entire system of wagons and armed guards. It was either bravery or desperation, and Fletcher couldn't tell which. By the third day, he was close, enough to see them. The figure moved like water over stone, fluid and certain. They wore traditional Apache clothing adapted for combat, lightweight, practical, designed for speed. But it was the mask that caught his attention. Bronze or copper-shaped to cover the entire face with narrow slits for the eyes. It wasn't decorative. It was armor, protection, anonymity. Fletcher watched from a distance as the rider circled a supply wagon that had stopped to water the horses. The guards never saw them coming. One moment the trail was empty. The next the masked figure was among them, moving with brutal efficiency. No, guasti motion, no hosetaschen. In less than 2 minutes, 3 guards were on the ground, conscious but disarmed. The rider took only what could be carried, dried meat, flour, medical supplies, and vanished back into the rocks before anyone could react. Fletcher made his decision. Then he wouldn't wait for another attack. He'd force the confrontation on his terms. He knew these canyons well enough to predict the rider's escape route. There was a narrow path ahead, barely wide enough for a horse. That's where he'd make his stand. He arrived first, dismounted, and waited. The sun was beginning its descent when he heard the hoof beatots. Steady, unhurried, confident, the rider appeared at the far end of the pass, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. Fletcher could feel his heartbeat in his throat. This was different from tracking rustlers or claim jumpers. This felt personal in a way he didn't understand. The masked figure dismounted, slowly, deliberately. Every movement was controlled, measured. They stood perhaps 30 yards apart, the narrow canyon walls rising on either side. Fletcher spoke. First, you've been making trouble for people who don't take kindly to it. His voice echoed off the stone. The masked warrior tilted their head slightly, studying him. When they spoke, the voice was muffled by the mask, but clear. Enough. Trouble is taking what doesn't belong to you. I'm just taking it back. The voice was not what Fletcher expected. Higher than a man's, but not feminine in any delicate way. Strong, certain, he felt something shift in his perception. But the mask revealed nothing. You're one person against a dozen armed convoys. That's not taking it back. That's choosing to die. The warrior moved their hand to the blade at their side. Maybe, but I won't die. Quiet. What happened next came fast and brutal. The warrior closed the distance between them with shocking speed, blade flashing in the fading light. Fletcher barely got his own knife up in time to deflect the strike. The impact sent shock waves up his arm. This wasn't some amateur playing at rebellion. This was someone who'd been trained to kill. They circled each other in the narrow space, dust rising around their feet. Fletcher had size and reach, but the warrior had speed and precision. Every attack Fletcher launched was deflected or avoided. Every opening he thought he saw closed before he could exploit it. They fought in silence except for the rasp of breath and the scrape of boots on stone. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Fletcher's muscles burned. Sweat stung his eyes. The warrior showed no signs of slowing. Then Fletcher saw his chance. The warrior overextended slightly on a thrust, and Fletcher grabbed their wrist, twisting hard. He used his weight to force them down, and they went to the ground together in a tangle of limbs. Fletcher ended up on top, his hand pinning the warrior's knife arm. They struggled beneath him, fierce and desperate. He could feel the heat of their body through the layers of clothing, could hear their breathing, harsh and ragged. For a moment they were so close, he could see his own reflection in the bronze mask. Then the warrior went still, not surrendering, but calculating. Fletcher reached up with his free hand and pulled the mask away. The face that looked up at him stole the breath from his lungs. Dark eyes that blazed with fury and something else he couldn't name. High cheekbones and a strong jawline. Black hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. A woman. The warrior was a woman. Fletcher froze completely. His grip loosened without him meaning it to. She used that moment to twist her hips and throw him off balance, reversing their positions in one fluid motion. Suddenly, she was on top of him, knife pressed against his throat. Her face was inches from his, those dark eyes boring into him. He could feel her breath on his face, could smell sage and smoke and leather. Neither of them moved. The blade was cold against his skin. One push and she could end this. But she didn't. She stared down at him like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Her chest heaved with exertion, her hair falling around her face. Fletcher's heart hammered for reasons that had nothing to do with the knife. Time seemed to stop. The canyon, walls, the fading light, the dust settling around them. All of it faded until there was only her face above his, and the weight of her body pinning him down. Then she spoke, and her voice was different without the mask. Raw, real. You saw my face. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation, an acknowledgement of something that couldn't be undone. Fletcher swallowed carefully against the blade. I did. She pressed the knife, fractionally harder. Then you know what I have to do. But she didn't move, didn't follow through. They stayed, frozen in that impossible moment. The question hanging between them. What happens now? And that's when they heard it, the sound that would change everything. Hoof beatots. Multiple horses coming fast from the direction. Fletcher had come. The supply convoy guards had tracked him, tracking her. And they were seconds away from finding both of them in this canyon with nowhere to run. Ayanna looked toward the sound, then back at Fletcher, and he saw the calculation in her eyes turn to something else. Something like desperation. She made a decision. Instead of cutting his throat, she grabbed his collar and hauled him to his feet with surprising strength. Run. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Fletcher stared at her, confused. She just tried to kill him. Now she was trying to save him. Before he could ask why, she was moving, pulling him toward a narrow crack in the canyon wall he hadn't noticed before. The hoof beatots were getting louder. The guards would round the corner any second. Fletcher had a choice to make, and he had maybe 3 seconds to make it. He ran, the crack in. The canyon wall was barely wide enough for one person, let alone two. Ayanna went first, moving sideways through the narrow gap with practiced ease. Fletcher followed, his shoulders scraping against stone. Behind them, the shouts of the guards echoed off the canyon walls. They'd found the abandoned horses. They'd find the tracks next. The gap opened into a small cave, barely tall, enough to stand in. Ayanna moved to the back where the darkness was thickest, and Fletcher followed. They pressed themselves against the cold stone, close enough that he could feel the rise and fall of her breathing. Neither spoke. Speaking would give them away. The guards' voices grew louder. Fletcher could hear individual words now. Trail. Splits here. Check that gap. Too narrow for a horse, but a man could fit. Footsteps approached the entrance to their hiding spot. Fletcher held his breath. Ayanna's hand moved to her blade. Slow and silent. A shadow fell across the cave entrance, and Fletcher could see the outline of a man peering into the darkness. The guard stood there for what felt like an eternity. Then another voice called out from farther away. Found fresh tracks heading north. They went up the ridge. The shadow at the entrance hesitated, then moved away. The footsteps receded. The voices faded, but still neither Fletcher nor Ayanna moved. They waited in the darkness, listening until the only sound was their own breathing and the distant cry of a hawk. When Ayanna finally moved, it was to check the cave entrance. She looked out carefully, scanning the canyon in both directions. Then she turned back to Fletcher, and in the dim light filtering into the cave, he could see her face. Clearly for the first time since he'd removed her mask. She was younger than he'd thought during the fight. Mid-20s, maybe, but her eyes held the kind of weight that came from seeing too much too soon. She studied him with an intensity that made him want to look away. But he held her gaze. Finally, she spoke. You should have turned me in. Her voice was low, barely above a whisper. Fletcher leaned against the cave wall. Probably, but you didn't. No. She tilted her head slightly. Why? It was a good question. Fletcher wasn't sure he had a good answer. He'd spent 3 days tracking her down, had taken money to bring her back dead or alive. And when a moment came to do exactly that, he'd run with her. You could have killed me, he said instead of answering. You had the blade at my throat. But you didn't. Ayanna's jaw tightened. That's different. How? Because I'm not a killer. Fletcher almost laughed at that. You disarmed 3 guards 2 hours ago. Disarmed, not killed. There's a difference. She moved away from the entrance, back toward where he stood. The cave wasn't large. When she stopped, she was close. Enough that he could see a small scar above her left eyebrow. I take what my people need to survive. I don't take lies unless I have no choice. Fletcher studied her face in the half-light. The fierce warrior who'd nearly bested him in combat. The woman who'd saved him instead of letting the guards find them both. Your people, he said. The settlements are on their land. It wasn't a question. Ayanna's eyes flashed with something between anger and pain. Our land? Yes. The land where my father was born. Where his father was born, going back generations. The land that was promised to us in treaties your government signed and then ignored the moment they found something they wanted more. Her voice was controlled, but Fletcher could hear the fury underneath. So, I take back what I can. Food, medicine, supplies they stole from us by stealing our land. Fletcher had no defense for that. He'd seen enough of the territories to know the treaties were worth nothing. That promises made to native peoples were broken as fast as they were made. That the settlers came and took and never considered what they were taking from. The guards will come back, Fletcher said. When they realize the tracks are a false trail, they'll come back here. Ayanna nodded. We need to move after dark. She fixed him with those dark eyes. You ran with me. That makes you a traitor in their eyes. Same as me. Fletcher knew. She was right. The moment he'd followed her into this cave, instead of turning her over to the guards, he'd made his choice. There was no going back to the town council, no collecting his payment, no returning to the life he'd had 3 days ago. He'd burned that bridge without even realizing he was holding the match. Where will you go? He asked. Ayanna was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that changed everything. There's a place in the high country where my people are gathering, but it's 3 days' ride, and we'd have to cross territory where every settlement has a description of me. She paused, measuring him. I can't do it alone. The implication hung in the air between them. She was asking for his help, or maybe not asking, maybe just stating a fact. Either way, Fletcher understood what she was offering. A purpose, say, direction, something that mattered more than tracking bounties for money. He should have said no, should have waited for darkness and slipped away, disappeared into the territories where no one would find him. But when he opened his mouth, different words came out. 3 days is a long time to travel with someone whose name you don't know. Something flickered across her face. Not quite a smile, but close. Ayanna. Fletcher. They stood in the darkness of the cave. Two people who should have been enemies, bound together now by circumstances neither had chosen. Outside, the sun was setting. Soon it would be dark enough to move. But now, they waited in the quiet, and Fletcher wondered what he'd just committed himself to. The sound came, without warning, a low rumble that grew steadily louder. Both of them moved to the cave entrance. In the distance, dust rose from the canyon floor. More riders, at least a dozen, maybe more. Not the guard from before. These were moving with military precision, spread out in a search pattern. Someone had brought reinforcements. Someone wanted Ayanna badly enough to commit serious resources. Fletcher felt her tense. Beside him, "They're not going to stop," she said quietly. "Not until they find me." Fletcher looked at the riders, then at her. "Then we make sure they don't." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. There were two people on foot, trapped in a canyon with limited exits, facing a dozen mounted riders who knew this area as well as he did. The odds weren't good. The odds were terrible, and night was still an hour away. The riders spread out across the canyon, full like a net closing. Fletcher counted 13 men, all armed, moving with the kind of coordination that spoke of military training or worse. Ayanna watched them from the cave entrance, her body coiled tight as a spring. Fletcher could see her calculating distances, angles, possibilities. None of them good. "There's another way out," she said. "Finally, through the back of the cave. It's narrow. We'd have to crawl." Fletcher looked into the darkness at the rear of the cave. He couldn't see anything that looked like an exit. How narrow? Narrow enough that you might not fit. She turned to face him, and her expression was unreadable. "I can make it. You be taking a chance." Below them, the riders were dismounting, preparing to search on foot. They had maybe 10 minutes before someone thought to check the narrow gap in the canyon wall. Fletcher made his decision. "Show me." Ayanna moved to the back of the cave, where the shadows were deepest. She knelt down and felt along the base of the wall until her hands found what she was looking for. A gap maybe 2 feet high and 3 feet wide, barely visible in the darkness. "It opens up after about 20 feet, she said. "Comes out on the other side of the ridge, but you have to go through the tight section first." Fletcher knelt beside her. The opening looked impossibly small. He was broader through the shoulders than most men. If he got stuck halfway through, he'd be trapped helpless. But staying here meant capture. Or worse. He looked at Ayanna, found her watching him with those dark eyes. "You first," he said. "I'll follow." She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. Without another word, she dropped to her stomach and slid into the gap. Fletcher watched her feet disappear into the darkness. He counted to 10, giving her time to get ahead, then followed. The moment he entered the passage, he understood what she'd meant. The stone pressed against his shoulders on both sides. His back scraped against the ceiling. He had to exhale completely just to move forward. Panic touched the edges of his mind. He pushed it away. Ahead, he could hear the soft sounds of Ayanna moving through the darkness. He focused on that, on following her, on the promise that it opened up ahead. The passage seemed to go on forever. His shoulders ached from holding them at an angle. His elbows were raw from dragging himself forward. Sweat ran into his eyes. Then, suddenly, the pressure eased. The passage widened. He could lift his head, could move his arms more freely. Relief flooded through him. A hand grabbed his wrist in the darkness. Ayanna pulling him forward. Almost there, she whispered, "Keep moving." Fletcher pulled himself along, following her touch until suddenly there was space. Around him, ere he could stand, dim light filtered down from above. They were in a vertical shaft, maybe 15 feet deep, with handholds carved into the stone. Ayanna was already climbing. Fletcher followed, his muscles protesting every movement. They emerged on the far side of the ridge, hidden from the canyon by a tumble of massive boulders. The sun had finally set. Twilight painted everything in shades of blue and gray. Ayanna moved immediately to check their surroundings, and Fletcher realized how practiced these movements were. She'd done this before. Used this escape route. Prepared for exactly this situation. How far to? Your people? Fletcher asked quietly. Ayanna pointed northeast. 2 days if we push hard. 3 if we're careful. And between here and there, 5 settlements, multiple ranches, territory, where anyone who sees me will report it. She turned to face him. And now they'll be looking for you, too. The guard saw. You. They know you helped me escape. Fletcher nodded. He'd known that the moment he'd made his choice in the canyon. Then we travel at night. Stay off the main trails. Ayanna studied him. You know this country. I've tracked through most of it. That's why they hired you. It wasn't a question. Fletcher met her gaze. Yes. For a long moment, they stood facing each other in the fading light. 2 people from different worlds thrown together by violence and choice, and something neither of them fully understood yet. Then Ayanna did something unexpected. She reached up and touched the side of his face where a cut from the earlier fight had dried. Her fingers were gentle, careful. Fletcher went completely still. The touch lasted only a moment, but it sent heat through his entire body. You're bleeding, she said quietly. It's nothing. It will get infected if you don't clean it. She pulled her hand back, but something in her eyes had changed, softened. There's a stream half a mile from here. We can clean up, fill our cantins, then move. Fletcher nodded, not trusting his voice. The place where she touched his face still burned. They moved through the twilight in silence. Ayanna leading the way with the confidence of someone who knew every rock and tree. Fletcher followed, watching the way she moved, the way she checked behind them every few minutes, the way she seemed to read the landscape like he read tracks. She was magnificent, dangerous, and capable, and completely self-sufficient. It should have put him on edge. Instead, it drew him in. The stream was exactly where she'd said it would be, a thin ribbon of clear water running between smooth stones. They knelt on opposite sides, washing the dust and blood from their faces and hands. Fletcher watched her. Across the water, she'd removed the outer layer of her clothing, revealing bare arms marked with small scars. Evidence of a life lived hard. She caught him looking and raised an eyebrow. What? Nothing, Fletcher said. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. The way the last light caught in her hair, the fierce intelligence in her eyes, the strength in her hands as she cooped water to her face. Ayanna finished washing and sat back on her heels. We should rest here for an hour. Let full dark come before we move. Fletcher agreed. They settled on opposite sides of a large boulder, hidden from view, but able to watch the approaches. For a while, neither spoke. Then Ayanna's voice came from the darkness. Why did you really run with me? Fletcher thought about lying, thought about giving her an answer that was safe and easy, but something about the darkness and the sound of the water made him tell the truth. Because when I saw your face, everything changed. Everything I thought I was doing, everything I thought I knew, it all became meaningless. Silence. Then quietly, he almost missed it. I know the feeling. Fletcher turned his head, trying to see her in the darkness. What do you mean when you could have let the guards find me, but you didn't? When you chose to run instead of turning me in? She paused. No one has ever chosen me over their own safety before. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Fletcher wanted to move closer to see her face, to understand what he heard in her voice. But before he could, a sound froze them both. voices coming from the direction they'd come. The riders had found the escape tunnel. They were on this side of the ridge, and they were getting closer. Ayanna moved first, silent as smoke. She grabbed Fletcher's arm and pulled him away from the boulder, deeper into the brush that lined the stream. They dropped flat against the ground, hidden beneath a tangle of low branches. Fletcher could feel the dampness of the earth soaking through his shirt. Ayanna pressed against his side, close enough that he could feel her heartbeat. Fast but steady, controlled. The voices grew louder. 3 men, maybe 4, moving along the ridge. Trail goes cold here. Check the stream. They might have stopped for water. Footsteps approached. Fletcher could see boots through gaps in the brush, no more than 10 feet away. He felt Ayanna's hand grip his arm, warning him to stay still. One of the men knelt at the stream's edge, cupping water to his mouth. If he looked up, if he glanced their direction, it was over. The man drank, then stood. Nothing here. They kept moving. Another voice further away. We're losing light. Can't track in the dark. Marshall wants them found, both of them. Marshall can want all he likes. I'm not breaking my neck stumbling around these rocks at night. We camp here. Pick up the trail at first light. Fletcher felt Ayanna tense beside him. If the men camped here, they'd be trapped. No way to move without being seen or heard. But the first voice spoke again. Not here. Too exposed. There's better ground half a mile south. Trees for cover, flat ground for bedrolls, and further from where we lost the trail. They're heading northeast. Everyone knows that. We'll catch them tomorrow, when they have to cross the valley. The voices began to fade as the men moved away. Fletcher and Ayanna stayed frozen until the sound of footsteps disappeared completely. Even then, they waited. Minutes passed. The darkness deepened. Finally, Ayanna lifted her head slightly, listening. Then she moved, pulling Fletcher up with her. We can't go. Northeast, she whispered. They'll be waiting. Fletcher nodded. South is blocked by the camp. West goes back, toward the settlements that leaves north through the high passes. Fletcher knew those passes steep, treacherous, even in daylight. At night, one wrong step could mean a fatal fall. That's suicide. Ayanna's eyes met his in the darkness. It's survival. They won't expect it. Won't follow us there at night. She was right, but that didn't make it less dangerous. Fletcher looked at the dark shapes of the mountains rising to the north. Then he looked at her face, barely visible in the starlight. The determination there, the refusal to give up. How well do you know those passes? He asked. Well enough. It wasn't the reassurance he'd hoped for, but it was all they had. Then we go north. They moved through the darkness with painful slowness. Every step had to be tested. Every handhold checked before trusting. Wait to it. The ground rose steadily, becoming rockier, steeper. Fletcher's legs burned from the constant climbing. His hands were raw from gripping stone. Ahead of him, Ayanna moved with remarkable sureness, finding paths he couldn't see. Twice she stopped him just before he would have stepped into empty air. She seemed to navigate as much by feel as by sight, reading the mountain through her feet and hands. Hours passed. The air grew colder. Fletcher's breath came in visible puffs. They were high now, higher than he'd realized. The stars seemed close enough to touch. Ayanna stopped a narrow ledge and turned back to help him up. Her hand gripped his with surprising strength. When he reached the ledge beside her, she didn't immediately let go. There's a shelf ahead, she said quietly. Wide enough to rest. We need to stop before we make a mistake. Fletcher agreed. They were both exhausted, running on nothing but determination. The shelf was exactly as she described. A flat section of rock protected by an overhang, hidden from view from above or below. They collapsed onto it, backs against the stone, breathing hard. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Fletcher felt Ayanna shiver beside him. The temperature had dropped significantly. They were exposed on the mountain with no fire, no blankets. You're cold, Fletcher said. I'm Phoenix. But she shivered again, betraying the lie. Fletcher made a decision. He moved closer and put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her against his side. She stiffened for a moment, then gradually relaxed into the warmth. "This doesn't mean anything," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Of course not," Fletcher replied. But they both knew it did. They sat like that as the night deepened around them. Fletcher could feel every point where their bodies touched. Her shoulder against his chest, her head resting just below his chin, the steady rhythm of her breathing. It should have been awkward. Instead, it felt natural, necessary. "Tell me about your people," Fletcher said quietly. Ayanna was silent for so long, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she began to speak. "We were promised land, peace, a place to live without fear. Those promises lasted exactly as long as it took for someone to decide they wanted what we had." Her voice was steady, but Fletcher could hear the pain beneath. "My father tried to fight through their courts, through their laws. He believed if we followed their rules, they'd honor their word. He died still believing that. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't bring him back, doesn't return our land, doesn't feed the children or heal the sick." She pulled away slightly to look up at him. "That's why I take what I can, because waiting for justice means watching people starve." Fletcher had no answer for that. No defense. He'd seen enough of the territories to know she was right, that the system was built to take from people like her and give to people like the settlers he'd been working for. "What about you?" Ayanna asked. "Why do you live like you do? Always moving, never staying." Fletcher considered lying, considered giving her some easy answer. But the darkness and the cold and the warmth of her body against his loosened something in him. Because staying means being known. Being known means being expected to be someone. "I've never been good at being who people expect." "Were you good at?" He smiled without humor. "Leaving before anyone can be." Disappointed, Ayanna turned to look at him fully. Their faces were inches apart. "Is that what you're planning to leave?" Fletcher met her eyes. "I don't know. That's honest at least." She held his gaze for another moment, then settled back against him. But something had shifted. Some barrier had thinned. They sat together on the mountain shelf. Two people running from different things toward an uncertain future. And Fletcher realized with sudden clarity that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be simple again. The sound of falling rocks somewhere below them shattered the moment. Someone was climbing the pass, coming up fast. They were on their feet instantly. Ayanna moved to the edge of the shelf, peering down into the darkness. Fletcher joined her, straining to see or hear anything in the blackness below. Then he saw it, a single point of light, a torch moving steadily upward. Whoever was climbing wasn't trying to hide. Just one person, Ayanna whispered. Could be a scout, could be someone who saw us come up here. Fletcher watched the light bob and weave as the climber navigated the treacherous path. They're moving fast, too fast for someone being careful, which means they know this path. Ayanna's voice was tight, which means they know where it goes. Fletcher understood immediately. If the climber knew this pass, they knew there were only certain places to rest, certain places where fugitives might stop. The ledge they were standing on was exactly that kind of place. "We need to move," Fletcher said. But Ayanna shook her head. "Too dangerous. One wrong step and we fall. And if we move, they'll hear us. Then we wait here and let them find us." "No." She turned to face him. "We make them think we're not here." Before Fletcher could ask how, she was moving. She grabbed loose rocks from the shelf and threw them hard away from their position. The rocks clattered down the mountain slope on the opposite side. Then she pulled Fletcher back into the deepest shadow of the overhang, pressing them both flat against the cold stone. The torch light grew brighter, closer. Fletcher could hear breathing now. Labor harsh. Whoever was climbing was pushing themselves hard. The light reached the bottom of their shelf. Then a hand appeared, gripping the edge. Another hand, then a head. The climber pulled themselves onto the shelf and stood holding the torch high. Fletcher's breath caught. It wasn't one of the guards. It was a woman older, maybe 50, with silver streaks in her dark hair. She wore Apache clothing similar to Ayanna's. For a moment, she stood perfectly still, the torch casting wild. shadows across the rock. Then she spoke. You can come out, Ayanna. I know you're here. Ayanna stiffened against Fletcher. The woman turned slowly, scanning the darkness. I didn't climb this mountain in the middle of the night to hurt you. I came to warn you. Still, Ayanna didn't move. The woman sighed. The marshal has men positioned at every pass, every trail, every water source between here and the high country. They're not just looking for you anymore. They're setting a trap. She paused. And there's something else. Something worse. Fletcher felt Ayanna's internal struggle. Trust or run. Fight or hide. Finally, she stepped out of the shadows. Fletcher followed, staying close. The woman's eyes went immediately to Fletcher, studying him with sharp intelligence. So it's true. You're traveling with one of them now. Ayanna's jaw tightened. He helped me escape. I can see that. The woman's tone was neutral, revealing nothing. The question is, why? That's between him and me, Naeli. Naeli. Fletcher filed the name away. The woman looked at Fletcher directly. You know, what you've done taking her side. You're a dead man walking. They'll hunt you same as her. No trial, no mercy. Fletcher met her gaze steadily. I know. Something flickered in Niall's eyes. Respect, maybe your surprise. She turned back to Ayanna. The council is divided. Someone help you. Others think you've brought too much attention. Put everyone at risk. Ayanna's face showed nothing. But Fletcher felt her tense. And you? Which side are you on? The side that wants you alive. Naeli moved closer, lowered her voice. There's a way through. Not the passes they're watching. An old route. Dangerous, but if you move fast, you can reach the gathering before they close all the paths. Where? I'll show you, but we need to leave now. The torch was a risk. They might have seen it. Ayanna looked at Fletcher, a question in her eyes. He understood what she was asking. Do we trust this? Fletcher studied Niall. The way she stood, the directness of her gaze, the fact that she'd climbed a mountain in darkness to deliver a warning. It could be a trap, but it could also be exactly what it appeared to be. He nodded slightly. Ayanna turned back to Naeli. Lead the way. The path Naeli took them down was even more treacherous than the one they'd climbed. Several times Fletcher was certain he was about to fall, but Naeli moved with absolute confidence, and both times Fletcher stumbled. Ayanna was there, steadying him. They descended for what felt like hours. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east when they finally reached level ground. They were in a narrow canyon Fletcher didn't recognize. Rocky walls rose on both sides, closing out most of the remaining starlight. Naeli stopped and turned to face them. This canyon runs for 3 miles, comes out near the old copper workings. From there, it's half a day to the gathering, but you need to move fast. Once the sun is up, they'll realize you slipped past them. Ayanna stepped forward. Thank you. Now reached out and gripped Ayanna's shoulders. Be careful. Trust is dangerous these days. Her eyes flicked to Fletcher, especially when it comes to strangers. With that, she turned and disappeared back into the darkness. Fletcher and Ayanna stood alone in the narrow canyon. The first pale light of dawn was touching the tops of the walls. Above them, do you trust her? Fletcher asked. Ayanna started walking. I trust that she believes she's helping. That's not the same thing. No, it's not. They moved through the canyon in silence. The walls closed in around them, sometimes narrow enough that they had to turn sideways. Fletcher's exhaustion was bone deep now. They'd been moving for almost 12 hours with no rest, except that brief time on the mountain shelf. He could see Ayanna was struggling, too. Her steps were less sure, her breathing heavier. They needed to stop, but stopping meant risking capture. The canyon opened suddenly into a wider area. Old wooden structures stood in various states of collapse. The copper workings Naeli had mentioned, signs of industry long abandoned, and standing in the center of the clearing, waiting for them, were 5 armed men. Fletcher's hand went to his knife. Beside him, Ayanna went very still. One of the men stepped forward. Not a settler. Apache, older, with a weathered face and eyes that missed nothing. Lower your weapon, he said to Fletcher. If we wanted you dead, you'd already be dead. Fletcher didn't lower the knife. The man smiled without warmth. You must be the one who betrayed his own people for her. I didn't betray anyone. No. The man gestured around them. You're here with her. That's betrayal enough. Ayanna stepped forward, putting herself slightly in front of Fletcher. Takakota, let us pass. Takakota, another name. Another player in whatever game this was becoming. Takakota's eyes never left Fletcher. The council wants to see you both. They have questions. Many questions about what? About whether you're a spy, whether you led the Marshal's men to our paths, whether the woman you're protecting is worth the war you're bringing to our doorstep. Fletcher felt Ayanna's fear, though her face showed nothing. These were her people, but they didn't trust her, didn't trust him, and they were trapped with nowhere to run. Takakota gestured with his rifle. Walk both of you north through those trees. Fletcher looked at Ayanna. She gave the slightest nod. They had no choice. The 5 men surrounded them as they moved through the abandoned workings and into the forest beyond. No one spoke. The only sound were boots on pine needles and the occasional snap of a branch. Fletcher kept his awareness sharp, watching for any opportunity, but the men were professionals. They maintained perfect spacing, never giving him an opening. After 20 minutes, they emerged into a clearing. What Fletcher saw made him stop. It wasn't a camp. It was a community. Dozens of structures built from wood and hide. Smoke rising from cooking fires. Children playing near a stream. Women working on clothing and tools. Men tending horses in a makeshift corral. This was what Ayanna had been fighting to protect. These were her people. Takakota led them to the largest structure at the center of the clearing. He ducked through the entrance, and Fletcher and Ayanna followed. Inside 5 people sat in a semicircle. 3 men, 2 women, all with the bearing of leaders. The council, the eldest woman, spoke first. Ayanna, we warned you that your actions would bring consequences. Ayanna stood straight, meeting the woman's gaze. My actions brought food, medicine, supplies that kept people alive. They also brought attention, patrols, searches. The woman's voice was hard. And now you bring one of them into our refuge. All eyes turned to Fletcher. He felt the weight of their judgment, the suspicion, the anger. One of the men leaned forward. Why did you help her? Fletcher chose his words carefully. Because it was the right thing to do. Right for who? For you? For us, or just for her? The man's tone was sharp. You made yourself a target. Made yourself useless to your own people. What do you gain from this? Fletcher thought about lying, about claiming some noble purpose. But these people had survived by reading truth from lies. I gained nothing except knowing I chose to stand with someone who was fighting for something that mattered. The eldest woman studied him. Pretty words, but words are wind. Actions are what matter. She turned to Ayanna. Tell us, can we trust him? Ayanna didn't hesitate. Yes. You're certain you've known him for what? A day? And you stake your reputation. You're standing with your people on someone who was hired to capture you. I stake it on someone who had every chance to turn me in and chose. Not to who ran with me when he could have walked away, who followed me up a mountain in darkness because I asked him. 2. Ayanna's voice was strong, certain. I trust him with my life. The council members exchanged glances. Something unspoken passed between them. The eldest woman spoke again. The marshal has 30 men searching these mountains. They're moving in a pattern, closing off every route. In 2 days, maybe 3, they'll be close enough to find us here. She paused. We're leaving, moving to winter grounds in the deep hills. But we can't move everyone at once. The old, the sick, the children. We need time. Fletcher understood what she was saying. You need a distraction. We need someone to make the marshal believe you went a different direction. Led his men away. From here long enough for us to evacuate. The woman fixed Fletcher with a hard stare. You know how those men think, how they track. You could do this. It wasn't a question. Fletcher looked at Ayanna. Her face showed nothing, but he could read the tension in her shoulders. The council was offering him a way to prove himself, but it meant separating from her. Meant drawing the entire search party onto himself. I'll do it, Fletcher said. Ayana's head snapped toward him. No, it's the only way. They'll kill you. Maybe, but they won't find your people. Fletcher turned to the council. I'll need a horse, supplies, and something the marshal will recognize as belonging. To Ayana, the eldest woman nodded slowly. You understand what you're volunteering for? This isn't just leading them away. You'll have to stay ahead of them for days. And when they finally catch you, and they will catch you, they won't be merciful. I understand. Ayana grabbed his arm. Can I speak to him alone? The eldest woman gestured toward the entrance. You have 5 minutes. Ayana pulled Fletcher outside away from the structure into the trees where they couldn't be overheard. When she turned to face him, her eyes blazed with fury and something else. Something that looked like fear. You can't do this, she said. It's suicide. It's necessary. There are other ways. Name one. Ayana opened her mouth, then closed it. They both knew there was no other way. No other option that didn't risk the entire community. Her shoulders sagged slightly. Why? Why would you do this for people you don't know? Fletcher reached out and touched her face the same way she'd touched his by the stream. She went very still. Because I know you, he said quietly. And you fight for them. That's enough. Ayana's eyes searched his face. Then, without warning, she closed the distance between them. Her lips met his in a kiss that was fierce and desperate and full of everything they hadn't said. Fletcher's arms went around her, pulling her close. For a moment, the world narrowed to just this. The warmth of her mouth, the press of her body against his, the taste of her breath. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Ayana rested her forehead against his. Cool me. Back, she whispered. I'll try. Not good enough. Promise me you'll come back. Fletcher knew he shouldn't make a promise he might not be able to keep. But looking into her eyes, feeling her hands gripping his shirt, he said it. Anyway, I promise. They stood like that for another moment, holding each other. Then Ayana stepped back. Her expression shifted, hardening into something Fletcher recognized. The warrior putting on armor. Then we better make sure you have a chance. She turned and walked back toward the council structure. Fletcher followed, still feeling the ghost of her kiss on his lips. Inside, the council waited. I need to go with him, Ayana said. The eldest woman shook her head. Absolutely not. He doesn't know these mountains like I do. Doesn't know where to run, where to hide. He'll die before he leads them half a mile, which is why you're too valuable to risk. I'm valuable because I know how to survive. Let me make sure he survives, too. The council members looked at each other. Finally, the eldest woman sighed. 2 days, you lead them south away from here. After 2 days, you separate. He continues the chase alone. You circle back. Ayana nodded. It wasn't what she wanted, but it was better than nothing. Takakota appeared in the entrance. The marshal's men are moving. They're 2 hours out coming from the east. If you're going to do this, you need to leave now. They rode hard from the moment they left the clearing. 2 horses, both strong and sure-footed, supplies tied behind the saddles. Ayana's bronze mask hanging deliberately from Fletcher's saddle where it would catch the light. A beacon for anyone looking. They headed south, making no effort to hide their trail. The opposite of everything Fletcher knew about. Evasion. But this wasn't about evasion. It was about being seen, about being chased. Within an hour, they heard the first shouts behind them. The marshal's men had picked up the trail. Ayana glanced back, then spurred her horse faster. Their closing distance, she called to Fletcher. Good. We want them. Close enough to stay interested. Not close enough to catch us. They rode through terrain that grew progressively rougher. Ayana led them along ridgeal lines where they'd be visible from below, through clearings where their movement would draw the eye. She was showing the pursuers exactly where they were going while staying just out of reach. By afternoon, Fletcher counted at least 15 riders behind them. The marshal had committed significant forces to this chase, which meant the plan was working. The community had time to evacuate, but it also meant he and Ayana were being pushed deeper into territory neither of them knew well. As the sun began its descent, Ayana led them into a narrow canyon. The walls rose steep on both sides. "There's a place ahead," she said, "where we can rest the horses without being seen." The place was a small cave, barely large. Enough for them and the horses. They led the animals inside and stood at the entrance, watching their back trail. No sign of pursuit yet, but they could hear distant sounds, voices, the jangle of equipment. Fletcher turned to Ayana. 2 days, the council said. Tomorrow you leave, go back. Ayana didn't look at him. Yes, you'll be safe there, and you'll be alone out here with 15 men hunting you. That was always the plan. Now she did look at him. Plans change. Before Fletcher could respond, she kissed him again, different from the first time. Less desperate, more deliberate. Her hands moved to his face, holding him like she was trying to memorize the feel of him. Fletcher pulled her closer, losing himself in the taste of her, the scent of her hair, the way she fit against him. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. The cave suddenly felt very small, very intimate. Ayana's eyes were dark, questioning. Fletcher understood what she was asking without words. He answered by kissing her again, slower this time. His hands traced the curve of her spine, feeling the strength in her back, the softness beneath the warrior exterior. She made a small sound against his mouth, and something in Fletcher's chest tightened. They moved together in the half-light of the cave, exploring with touches and kisses what words couldn't express. The fear of what tomorrow might bring. The connection that had formed between them in violence, and trust, and something deeper than either. When they finally settled on the cave floor, Ayana rested her head against Fletcher's chest. His arm was around her, holding her close. Outside, the sounds of pursuit had faded. "Tell me about where you're from," Ayana said, quietly. Fletcher was silent for a moment. "There's not much to tell. Small town, smaller opportunities. I left when I was 16 and never looked back. No family. A father who drank more than he worked. A mother who died when I was young. 2 brothers I haven't seen in 10 years. His hand moved absently through her hair. Nothing worth going back to. Ayana traced a pattern on his chest with her finger. "Is that why you drift? Because there's nothing to hold you anywhere. Maybe. Or maybe I drift because I've never found anything worth staying for." He felt her tense slightly. "Until now," he added quietly. She lifted her head to look at him. "Fletcher, don't tell me this is temporary. Don't tell me that after tomorrow we go our separate ways and forget this happened." "I wasn't going to say that." "Then what were you going to say?" Ayana sat up, pulling away slightly. The loss of her warmth was immediate. "I was going to say that my world and your world don't fit together. That even if we both survive this, there's no path forward for us." Fletcher sat up too. "Because I'm not Apache. Because you're not part of this fight, this life. These people." She gestured toward the cave, entrance toward where her community was evacuating. "My life is here with them, fighting for them. I can't walk away from that. I'm not asking you to, aren't you? What else could we do? You can't stay with my people. They'd never fully trust you, and I can't leave them. Can't. Stop fighting." Her voice cracked slightly. "We're trapped in circumstances that don't allow for what we both want." Fletcher reached for her hand. "Then we change the circumstances." "How? How do we do that?" "I don't know yet, but I know I'm not letting you go without fighting for this. For us." Ayana's eyes shimmered in the fading light. "You might not have a choice." The sound of a horse screaming in pain shattered the moment. Both of them rushed to the cave entrance. In the canyon below, the marshal's men had caught up. But something was wrong. The riders were scattered, confused. One horse was down, thrashing. As Fletcher and Ayana watched, another rider was thrown from his mount. Then Fletcher saw it. A third group, not the marshal's men, not Apache, raiders, opportunists who'd been watching the chase and decided to strike. While everyone was focused on the pursuit, they were hitting the marshal's men from 3 sides, creating chaos. "We need to move," Ayana said. "Now, while they're distracted." They grabbed the horses and mounted quickly. Ayanna led them up out of the canyon through a steep trail Fletcher wouldn't have attempted in daylight. But night was falling, and in the chaos below, no one was watching for them. They rode hard for 2 hours before Ayanna finally slowed. They were on high ground now, the land opening up around them. "Tomorrow I have to leave you," Ayanna said without looking at him. "Yes, and you'll keep running. Keep leading them away." "Yes." She turned in her saddle to face him. "And after when this is over, if we both survive," Fletcher met her gaze, "then I find you. However long it takes. Wherever you are, you do that. Give up your life of drifting for me." In a heartbeat, Ayanna stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Then I'll wait. However long it takes." They rode through the night side by side, neither knowing if they'd survive long enough to keep those promises. But for now, in this moment, the promises were enough. Dawn broke cold and clear. Fletcher woke to find Ayanna already preparing to leave. She moved with quiet efficiency, checking her horse's hooves, adjusting the saddle, not looking at him. Fletcher stood, every muscle in his body protesting. "Ayanna," she stopped but didn't turn. "Don't make this harder than it already is. Look at me, please." She turned slowly. Her eyes were dry but haunted. Fletcher crossed to her and took her hands in his. "This isn't goodbye. This is see you soon. You don't know that. You can't promise that." "I already did last night, and I meant every word." Ayanna squeezed his hands. "Then be smart. Stay alive. Don't try to be a hero. Same to you." She smiled sad and beautiful. Then she kissed him one last time, soft, lingering, a promise wrapped in goodbye. When she pulled back, she pressed something into his palm. A small, carved stone, smooth and warm from her pocket. "So, you remember what you're coming back to?" Fletcher closed his fingers around it. "I won't need this to remember." Ayanna mounted her horse. For a moment, she sat there looking down at him. Then, she turned the horse north and rode away without looking back. Fletcher watched until she disappeared over the ridge. Then he turned south and began the second half of the plan. The part where he stayed alive long enough to keep his promise. He rode deliberately, leaving clear signs. Broken branches, disturbed earth, the bronze mask still hanging from his saddle. By midday, he heard them behind him. The marshal's men recovered from the raider attack and back on the hunt. Fletcher led them through rough terrain, always staying just ahead, using every trick he'd learned in years of tracking to extend the chase. Make them work for every mile. 2 days became 3, then 4. Fletcher's supplies ran low. His horse grew tired, but he kept moving, kept the pursuers focused on him, buying time for Ayanna's people to reach safety. On the 5th day, Fletcher's luck ran out. His horse stepped in a hole and went down hard. Fletcher hit the ground and rolled, pain shooting through his shoulder. The horse struggled up, favoring its front leg. Lame, useless. Fletcher could hear the riders closing in. He grabbed his knife and what supplies he could carry and ran on foot. The terrain grew steeper, rockier. Fletcher climbed, using his hands as much as his feet. Behind him, the shouts grew louder. They were close now, too close. Fletcher reached the top of a ridge and stopped. Below him, a valley stretched out, and on the far side, barely visible in the distance. He saw it, smoke from multiple fires. The temporary camp of Ayanna's people. They'd made it. They were safe. A bullet struck the rock near Fletcher's head, spraying stone fragments. He turned. The marshal's men were spread out below him, rifles raised. At least 20 of them now. The marshal himself stepped forward. "Fletcher Knox, you've led us on quite a chase." Fletcher said nothing. The marshal gestured with his rifle. "Come down. Make this easy. Where's the fun in that?" The marshal's face hardened. "You've got nowhere to go. No horse, no supplies. You're finished." Fletcher looked at the men surrounding him. Then he looked back at the distant smoke from Ayanna's camp. He'd done what he promised. Led them away. Bought the time they needed. The marshal followed his gaze. Saw the smoke. Understanding. Crossed his face. "You clever fool. This was all a distraction." Seems that way. Well, it won't matter. We'll find them eventually. Fletcher smiled. Maybe, but not today and not because of me. The marshal raised his rifle. Any last words? Fletcher touched the carved stone in his pocket. Thought of dark eyes and fierce determination and a kiss that promised everything. Just one. Worth it. The sound of hoof beatots made everyone turn. From the north, riders appeared. Apache warriors, at least 30 of them, moving fast. Leading them was Ayanna, her face set with determination. She'd come. Back for him. The marshal's men scattered, caught between two forces. In the chaos, Fletcher ran. He slid down the ridge, stones cutting his hands until strong arms grabbed him. Ayanna pulling him onto her horse behind her. You came back, Fletcher said, gripping her tight. Did you really think I wouldn't? They rode hard. The Apache warriors covering their retreat. The marshal's men tried to pursue, but they were outnumbered now, outmaneuvered. By the time the sun set, Fletcher and Ayanna were safe in the temporary camp, surrounded by her people. The council gathered that evening. The eldest woman looked at Fletcher with something that might have been respect. You kept your word, led them away long enough for us to move everyone to safety. That was the deal, Fletcher said. And now she looked between him and Ayanna. Now you've proven yourself, bled for us, risked everything. She paused. If you want to stay, you're welcome here. As one of us, Fletcher looked at Ayanna. She nodded, her eyes bright. I want to stay, Fletcher said. Not just for a while, for good. The eldest woman smiled. Then, stay, learn our ways, fight alongside us. But know this, the path ahead won't be easy. The settlers won't stop. The marshal won't give up. We'll be fighting for a long time. Fletcher reached for Ayanna's hand. She took it, her fingers interlacing with his. I've been running my whole life, he said, looking for something worth staying for. I found it. Ayanna squeezed his hand. And I found someone worth fighting beside. 6 months later, Fletcher stood on the same ridge where he'd nearly died, but everything was different now. He wore Apache clothing, spoke enough of the language to get by, knew the faces and names of the people he now called family. Ayanna came up beside him, her shoulder touching his. Thinking about the day we met, Fletcher smiled, thinking about how wrong I was, about strength, about courage, about what matters. And now I know strength isn't just physical. Courage isn't the absence of fear. And what matters most is standing beside someone you'd give anything to protect. Ayanna turned to face him fully. I love you, Fletcher Knox. It was the first time she'd said it. Fletcher pulled her close. I love you too. They stood together on the ridge, watching the sun set over land that was worth fighting for. Surrounded by people worth protecting, bound together by a choice made in violence that had become something beautiful. The marshal would come again, the fight would continue. But whatever came next, they'd face it together. And that made all the difference. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale. From the untamed frontier, where courage and destiny collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.